At Regal Ridge Medical Center, the polished chrome and hushed urgency felt alien to Adjoa Mensah. A new surgical nurse, she moved like a shadow, her quiet competence swallowed by the gleaming theater where reputations were forged and shattered. Doctors swept past, their white coats crisp, their confidence a palpable force. No one truly saw Adjoa, they saw nurse, a cog in a flawless machine. A dismissive glance from Dr. Ingrid Hornson, already a rising star, was a daily reminder of her place. But Adjoa saw everything. She felt the subtle shift in the room's energy as the trauma bay doors burst open. Elias Volkov, a construction worker, arrived, his breath a desperate rattle, a tiny, jagged nail searing a dark path into his chest. Life bled out of him with frightening speed. Scans confirmed the nightmare. The projectile, invisible to the naked eye, danced precariously near his aorta. No one could find it. But in Adjoa's gut, a different kind of vision stirred, a quiet knowing that defied logic, whispering that she held the key to a life hanging by a thread. The operating room at Regal Ridge Medical Center was a symphony of precision and hushed expectation. Gleaming chrome reflected the harsh overhead lights, instruments lay in perfect rows, and the air, scrubbed clean of all impurities, still felt heavy with the weight of a life teetering on the edge. This was Dr. Kaito Nakamura's domain, a stage where he performed miracles, his reputation as the chief of thoracic surgery preceding him like a royal herald. He moved with a practiced grace, his hands, encased in sterile gloves, already calculating, assessing, anticipating. Adjoa Mensah stood a little apart, a quiet presence by the instrument tray. Her eyes, however, missed nothing. The rhythmic beep-beep-beep of the cardiac monitor was a constant refrain, a fragile pulse against the backdrop of Nakamura's unshakable confidence. She watched him now, his movements fluid as he prepared for the incision. Beside him, Dr. Ingrid Hornson, sharp-eyed and ambitious, mirrored his posture, her gaze sweeping the room, lingering just a moment too long on Adjoa with an almost imperceptible flick of dismissal. In this kingdom of medical gods, Adjoa, the new surgical nurse, was little more than a ghost, her profound experience in makeshift field hospitals considered irrelevant, her quiet competence unheard. Elias Volkov, the stoic construction worker, lay under the sterile drapes, his chest a canvas of precise markings. The tiny nail gun projectile, a cruel, jagged shard of metal, pulsed on the monitor, a phantom menace embedded perilously close to his aorta. Internal bleeding, subtle but relentless, painted a grim picture on the screens. Nakamura, his voice calm, almost meditative, called for the first scalpel. The initial cuts were clean, confident, a testament to Nakamura's legendary skill. The attending surgical team, usually a flurry of quiet activity, seemed to hold its collective breath, hanging on every one of the chief's precise movements. But Adjoa felt a familiar unease stir in her gut. She watched the advanced imaging projections flickering on the large screen, a blurred landscape of tissue and bone, and then looked at where Nakamura was meticulously exploring. A subtle discord hummed in her mind. It was a sensation she'd learned to trust in war-torn clinics where X-rays were a luxury and touch was the only guide, a tactile whisper that something was not quite as it appeared. Nakamura's brow furrowed almost imperceptibly as the moments stretched. His initial confident exploration yielded nothing. The tiny nail, despite the advanced imaging, remained maddeningly elusive. He probed a little deeper, his instruments brushing against delicate tissue. A bead of sweat traced a path down his temple. His voice, once smooth, now held a faint, sharp edge as he asked for a different retractor. Ingrid, ever vigilant for any sign of weakness or opportunity, noticed the subtle shift in Nakamura's demeanor. Her own face tightened with concern, reflecting his growing frustration. She barked an order at a junior resident, a terse reminder of the stakes. The atmosphere in the OR, once tightly controlled, began to fray at the edges. Adjoa's anxiety mounted, a silent drumbeat against her ribs. She shifted her weight, her gaze fixed on the monitor, then on Nakamura's searching instruments. The memory of a small, barely visible shard of glass in a child's hand, missed by a frantic doctor but found by her own careful touch, flashed in her mind. It's deeper, her intuition whispered, and slightly to the left of where he's focusing. She wanted to speak, to offer the quiet, almost imperceptible guidance her gut screamed at her to provide. But the words died in her throat, choked by the rigid hierarchy of Regal Ridge. She saw Ingrid's sharp glance catch her slight movement, a silent admonishment that reinforced the chasm between them. A nurse didn't interrupt the chief of thoracic surgery. Not here. Not ever. Nakamura's frustration was now palpable, radiating through the sterile air. His precise movements grew slightly more agitated, his instruments tapping with a frustrated cadence against bone. "The imaging is inconsistent," he muttered, his voice tightening. "It shouldn't be this difficult." Elias's vital signs, displayed prominently, began a slow, ominous decline. The beep-beep-beep of the monitor seemed to quicken its pace, mirroring the rising panic in the room. The star surgeon, for the first time, looked truly lost. The silence in the operating room, once sterile and focused, now felt brittle, threatening to shatter. Dr. Nakamura's brow was slick with sweat, his usually steady hands betraying a tremor as he continued his meticulous search. He probed, adjusted the scope, but the tiny, lethal projectile remained stubbornly hidden. The advanced imaging, meant to be his infallible guide, seemed to mock him, providing only an ambiguous blur in the dense tissue surrounding Elias's aorta. "Retractor." "Deeper," he commanded, his voice tight, the unspoken word again hanging heavy in the air. The resident assisting moved quickly, but there was a hesitation in their movements, a palpable fear that mirrored the growing dread in Adjoa's own chest. Each unsuccessful probe, each fractional delay, felt like a hammer blow against Elias Volkov's remaining precious moments. "It's deeper," Adjoa's intuition screamed, an insistent current of certainty against the chaotic eddy of the room. "And slightly to the left of where he's searching. It's angled, not straight on." She could feel it, a phantom sensation echoing the time she'd plucked fragments of metal from wounded flesh in conditions far worse than this gleaming theater. Her gaze flickered to the monitor, then back to Nakamura's grim profile, then to Elias's ashen face, framed by the sterile drapes. This man, a construction worker, strong and stoic, was fading. He had a family, a life that was about to be snuffed out by a misplaced nail and a surgeon's pride. The words, though quiet, were pulled from her with a force she couldn't resist. "Dr. Nakamura," she began, her voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the sharp beep-beep-beep of the cardiac monitor, which was accelerating with terrifying regularity. "Perhaps, a slightly different approach. The angle, it could be deceptive." She gestured, a tiny, almost imperceptible tilt of her head towards the lower left quadrant of the screen. Nakamura froze, his hand mid-air, a precise surgical instrument hovering over Elias's exposed chest. He turned his head slowly, his eyes, usually sharp and clinical, now clouded with a dangerous mix of frustration and indignation. "Nurse Mensah," he articulated, each syllable laced with condescension, "your expertise, while commendable in other settings, does not extend to thoracic surgery in a state-of-the-art facility. I am aware of the angles." His voice dropped to a cutting whisper. "Nurses anticipate, they do not direct. Is that clear?" The rebuke was like a physical blow, silencing not just Adjoa, but the entire room. Ingrid Bjornsson, standing opposite, offered a tight, almost triumphant smirk, her eyes briefly meeting Adjoa's with a silent "I told you so." A hot flush crept up Adjoa's neck, not of shame, but of fury, not for herself, but for Elias, whose life was slipping away while egos clashed. "Vitals dropping rapidly, doctor," the anesthesiologist called out, his voice laced with genuine panic. Elias's blood pressure, already precarious, now plunged. The pulse oximeter flatlined momentarily before stuttering back to a dangerously low reading. A fresh wave of deep, crimson blood welled up, obscuring the already difficult field. Nakamura cursed, a low, guttural sound unlike his usual controlled demeanor. He refocused, his frustration now transmuted into a desperate, almost frenzied energy. His movements became less surgical, more frantic, his instruments probing with a blunt force that made Adjoa wince internally. He was no longer a surgeon seeking precision, he was a man losing control, battling against an unseen enemy, his legendary reputation dissolving with each beat of Elias's weakening heart. "Damn it, where is it?" he snarled, his voice cracking with a raw, undeniable fear. The weight of his failure, the imminent loss of a patient under his star surgeon's knife, was crushing him. The OR, usually a temple of calm efficiency, was now a pressure cooker of escalating panic. Desperation clawed at the edges of Adjoa's composure. She saw the fear in the eyes of the junior resident, the grim acceptance dawning on Ingrid's face. Elias Volkov was dying, not because the bullet couldn't be found, but because the man who could find it was silenced, her quiet, insistent truth dismissed as an impertinence. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth, mingling with the metallic tang of fear. Time was not merely running out, it had already begun to sprint towards a catastrophic end. Adjoa's quiet strength, often overlooked, mirrors a universal feeling, doesn't it? If you've ever rooted for the underdog, or felt your own contributions go unnoticed, then we invite you to join our journey. We're building a global community of story lovers who champion these narratives of hidden potential and unwavering courage. Your support, by simply clicking subscribe, is invaluable. It helps us tremendously in bringing you more compelling, better produced stories like Adjoa's. Become part of our family, and let's continue to shine a light on extraordinary acts from unexpected heroes, together. Nakamura's furious exit left a vacuum in the operating room, a cold, clinical despair that seeped into the sterile air. The metallic clang of his discarded instruments echoed the finality of his pronouncement, "We're done." The junior resident, Dr. Anya Sharma, stood frozen, her face pale, eyes wide with horror. Dr. Ingrid Bjornsson, usually so composed, was rigid, her jaw clenched, a mask of disbelief struggling with defeat. Elias Volkov's heart monitor, though still beeping, seemed to sigh with each weakening pulse. He was dying. They all knew it. Adjoa Mensah, however, felt a different kind of stillness. It wasn't the paralysis of defeat, but the quiet, terrifying calm before a storm. Her own heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the room, yet her hands, usually so deft and gentle, trembled with a peculiar mix of terror and conviction. He can't find it. We're done. The words ricocheted in her mind, not as a statement of fact, but as a challenge, an unacceptable end. She looked at Elias, his chest open, vulnerable, his life ebbing away with every passing second. And then she looked at Anya, the junior resident, whose youthful face mirrored the silent question in Adjoa's own soul, "Is this really how it ends?" Anya's eyes, glazed with shock, met Adjoa's. In that charged, wordless exchange, a silent plea passed between them. Adjoa's gaze was direct, unwavering, filled with an urgent, desperate hope, yet entirely devoid of arrogance. "Give me a chance." It was a question, an order, a prayer, all wrapped in one. Every fiber of Adjoa's being screamed at her to act. Years of field work, of improvised solutions in desperate situations, of relying on senses beyond what technology could provide, resurfaced with a fierce, burning clarity. She remembered the faces of patients in makeshift clinics, lives hanging by a thread, and the undeniable truth that sometimes the most profound medical knowledge lay not in gleaming machinery or prestigious titles, but in the quiet, focused power of a human touch. Fear, cold and sharp, pricked at her. The wrath of Dr. Nakamura, the inevitable humiliation, the potential professional ruin, it all flashed before her. Regal Ridge did not tolerate insubordination, especially from a nurse. Yet, another fear, far deeper and more primal, overshadowed it, the fear of standing by and watching a life needlessly slip away. This wasn't just a protocol, it was a human being. And she knew, with an unshakable certainty, that she could find it. Anya hesitated, her gaze flicking from Adjoa to the empty space where Nakamura had stood, then back to Elias's faltering vitals. Her training screamed protocol, hierarchy, disaster. But her Hippocratic oath, the raw, human plea in Adjoa's eyes, screamed life. A tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It was a silent, terrifying act of defiance, a shared conspiracy born of desperation. As Adjoa moved, a soft, almost reverent approach to the table, Ingrid Bjornsson snapped out of her stupor. "Nurse Mensah, what do you think you're doing?" Her voice, usually controlled, was now a sharp, panicked whisper, laced with incredulity. Dr. Nakamura declared it. "It's too risky. You can't possibly." Adjoa didn't even glance at Ingrid. Her eyes were fixed on Elias, her entire being centered on the task at hand. Ingrid's words were just a buzzing, distant drone against the roaring imperative within Adjoa. "He's dying, Doctor," Adjoa stated, her voice quiet but firm, carrying an authority that surprised even herself. There was no defiance in her tone, only a profound, undeniable truth. There were no other options. Nakamura had left. Elias was fading. With a surge of strength that seemed to originate from a wellspring deep within her, Adjoa stepped fully into the role she had been preparing for her entire life. Her movements were deliberate, precise, imbued with a grace born of purpose. She gently pushed Anya aside, not roughly, but with an unspoken confidence that left no room for argument. Her gloved hands, usually tending to instruments, now hovered over Elias's open wound, no longer just a surgical nurse, but a healer, a sentinel standing guard at the precipice of life and death. The air in the room, once thick with despair, now thrummed with a fragile, almost unbearable tension. All eyes were on her, a new nurse from nowhere, about to challenge the impossible. This wasn't just a medical procedure, it was an act of raw, unadulterated courage. The operating theater, usually a realm of clipped commands and precise movements, fell into an unnerving hush. All eyes were glued to Adjoa. She moved with a profound, almost primal grace, her presence amplifying, filling the space previously dominated by Nakamura's bluster. Her gloved hand, the same hand that had prepped countless instruments and monitored vital signs, now hovered with a delicate reverence over Elias Volkov's exposed chest. She didn't immediately plunge in. Instead, her head tilted slightly, her eyes closed for a brief, almost imperceptible moment, as if she were tuning herself to an unheard frequency. Ingrid Bjornsson, her face a mask of furious disbelief, took a step forward, a sharp retort already forming on her lips. "This is absurd. You can't just," but the words caught in her throat. Adjoa had begun. Her movements were astonishingly gentle, a stark contrast to the forceful, almost aggressive probing Nakamura had employed. Adjoa's index finger, protected by latex, slipped into the wound, not tearing or stretching, but gliding. It wasn't a search for something visual or even a blunt instrument seeking resistance. It was an act of profound, tactile listening. She wasn't looking for the nail, she was letting the tissue speak to her, feeling its subtle shifts, its whispers of damage, its deeper resonances. Anya, the junior resident, watched with bated breath, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She saw not incompetence, but an extraordinary focus, a quiet confidence that radiated outwards. The monitor displaying Elias's vitals remained grim, but for the first time since Nakamura had walked out, a fragile seed of hope began to unfurl within her. She found herself subconsciously mimicking Adjoa's breathing, slowing her own frantic pulse. Ingrid, however, was still struggling. She had seen countless procedures, assisted the finest surgeons, prided herself on her adherence to protocol and textbook knowledge. This was entirely outside her understanding. It was unprofessional. It was wrong. She expected immediate failure, a panicked withdrawal, a confirmation of her dismissal of Adjoa's capabilities. Yet, Adjoa continued, her brow furrowed in concentration, not sweat, her movements unnervingly steady. The room was so silent, one could almost hear the frantic beating of Elias's failing heart. The anesthesiologist, a seasoned professional named Dr. Ramirez, adjusted the drip with an almost imperceptible tremor in his hand. He glanced from the plummeting numbers on his display to Adjoa's face, then back again. His years of experience screamed impossible, yet the sheer composure of the nurse, the almost meditative quality of her touch, held him captive. Elias's blood pressure, which had been steadily declining, seemed to, for a split second, hold its own. Then it dipped again, a cruel tease, a reminder of the relentless march of death. Adjoa's internal world was a symphony of sensation. The unique texture of the surrounding muscle fibers, the slickness of pooled blood, the subtle elasticity of connective tissue. She wasn't just feeling for an object, she was mapping the landscape of the injury with her fingertips, building a three-dimensional model in her mind. It was a language she understood intimately, honed in environments where sophisticated imaging was a luxury she couldn't afford. There was a slight irregularity here, a faint tremor in the tissue there, a barely perceptible hardness at a depth that Nakamura had dismissed. It was so tiny, so elusive, yet Adjoa was certain it was there, lurking. Time stretched, became elastic, then snapped taut. The seconds felt like hours. Every person in the room was holding their breath, their skepticism slowly eroding, replaced by a growing, bewildering awe. Ingrid found her objections silenced, her scientific mind struggling to reconcile what she was seeing with everything she had been taught. Adjoa wasn't probing, she was listening with her fingers, and slowly, impossibly, she was getting closer. The delicate dance of her gloved digit was a ballet of sensitivity, seeking the anomaly that screamed for attention, even as it tried to hide. Then, a flicker. A subtle shift in the firmness of the tissue, a distinct, almost metallic ghost of resistance against the very tip of her finger. It wasn't the large, obvious mass Nakamura had been searching for. It was small, embedded, and deeply, cunningly hidden. A quiet gasp escaped Adjoa's lips, so soft it was almost a whisper, but in the profound silence of the oar, it was like a thunderclap. Her eyes, still intensely focused, met Anya's for a fleeting second, conveying a message of breakthrough, of profound, unshakable certainty. She had found it. Not visually, not through a scanner, but through the unique, silent language of touch. Adjoa's fingers, guided by an intuition sharper than any scalpel, tightened around the tiny anomaly. It offered a momentary, stubborn resistance, a last defiant grasp on the life it had nearly claimed. Then, with a delicate, almost imperceptible shift in pressure, a barely audible click that seemed to echo in the profound silence of the room, the fragment dislodged. Slowly, exquisitely, Adjoa drew her gloved finger back, revealing the culprit, a minuscule, dark, irregularly shaped nail, no bigger than a grain of rice, glinting faintly under the surgical lights. It was wickedly sharp, its edges jagged, a lethal shard of metal that had managed to evade every high-tech scan and the chief surgeon's renowned skill. For a beat, 2 beats, time simply stopped. The scrub nurse, Ms. Jenkins, who had been holding her breath, let out a small, choked gasp, her eyes fixed on the nail as if it were a jewel of impossible rarity. Anya, the junior resident, stared, her jaw dropping open, a silent scream of astonishment and relief trapped in her throat. Her face, moments ago etched with despair, was now a canvas of dawning incredulity, her gaze darting from the nail to Adjoa's quiet, focused face. Adjoa carefully deposited the nail into a waiting sterile dish, her movements precise, unhurried, as if she had simply performed the most routine of tasks. Her chest, however, held a tremor of exhausted relief, a deep, silent sigh that bypassed her lips and resonated only within her. She had felt it, known it, believed in it, and now, here it was. The impossible had just been rendered undeniably real. The frantic symphony of alarms that had dominated the oar for what felt like an eternity began to soften, then to resolve into a steady, reassuring rhythm. Elias Volkov's vitals, which had been plummeting into a dangerous abyss, began their slow, tentative climb back from the brink. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Chen, who had been hovering over his monitors with a grim, watchful intensity, let out a long, shuddering breath, his shoulders slumping in sudden, overwhelming relief. He met Anya's wide eyes, then Adjoa's, and offered a shaky nod, a silent acknowledgement of the miracle that had just unfolded. Stabilizing, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, he's going to make it. Anya's eyes welled with tears, not of sorrow, but of pure, unadulterated elation. The sheer tension of the past hour, the crushing weight of impending loss, now dissolved into a wave of profound gratitude. She looked at Adjoa, truly looked at her, seeing past the quiet demeanor and the modest uniform to the extraordinary force of nature beneath. There was no longer any doubt, no lingering scientific skepticism, only awe. Adjoa, she whispered, her voice barely audible, you did it. Her hand instinctively reached out, squeezing Adjoa's arm in a gesture of unspoken triumph and camaraderie. Dr. Ingrid Bjornsson, who had been standing rigidly by the wall, her expression a careful mask of disapproval and barely concealed disdain, now found her perfectly composed features fractured. Her eyes, usually sharp and critical, were wide with a mix of shock and something akin to horror. The evidence was irrefutable. The chief surgeon, the titan of thoracic surgery, had failed. And the quiet, unassuming nurse he had so scornfully dismissed had just plucked life from the jaws of death, with nothing more than her gloved finger and an almost supernatural touch. Ingrid's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came, her carefully constructed world of hierarchy and certainty having just been irrevocably shaken. The air in the OR, moments ago thick with despair and professional tension, now crackled with a sudden, profound shift. A palpable current of relief, wonder, and exhilaration coursed through the remaining team members. A scrub tech wiped away a tear. A circulating nurse offered Adjoa a small, heartfelt smile. Elias Volkov, the stoic construction worker, was no longer a lost cause. He was a survivor, a testament to a different kind of expertise, a quiet, profound brilliance that had finally been unveiled. Adjoa, though internally exhausted, felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She hadn't sought glory, but she had saved a life, and in that moment, in the hushed, reverent silence of the operating room, that was enough. The silence that followed Adjoa's quiet triumph was not merely the absence of sound, but a heavy, reverent hush, thick with awe. Dr. Chen, the junior resident, was the first to stir, his eyes wide, disbelief warring with profound relief. He moved instinctively to Elias's side, checking the readouts, a low murmur of vitals stabilizing, bleeding controlled. Escaping his lips. A collective sigh, almost inaudible, swept through the room, a wave of tension washing away to reveal pure, unadulterated wonder. Ingrid, however, remained frozen. Her face, usually a mask of sharp ambition, was now a canvas of stark, bewildered shock. She had dismissed Adjoa, belittled her, yet here Adjoa stood, not with a scalpel or a laser, but with the simplest, oldest tool in medicine, human touch, having accomplished what the renowned chief of thoracic surgery could not. The small, twisted nail, now resting in the sterile tray, was not just a foreign object, it was a physical embodiment of the shattering of Ingrid's rigid worldview, a direct challenge to every assumption she held about status, expertise, and power. Her humiliation was palpable, a bitter aftertaste in the otherwise sweet air of salvation. Just as the team began to collectively process the miracle, the double doors of the OR swung open with a familiar, aggressive force. Dr. Kaito Nakamura strode back in, his face still flushed with a cocktail of fury and defeat. He expected to find a defeated team preparing for closure, perhaps muttering condolences. Instead, he met a roomful of stunned faces, eyes fixed not on the patient, nor on the monitors, but on Adjoa, who stood by the table, calmly assisting with the final checks, the retrieved projectile now secured. Nakamura stopped dead, his gaze sweeping across the scene. He saw the tranquilized patient, the stabilizing vitals on the screen, the collective relief on his team's faces. His eyes then landed on Adjoa, then on the sterile tray, where the tiny, wicked nail glinted under the harsh OR lights. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. His jaw tightened, a muscle in his temple twitching. Disbelief warred with a primal surge of something akin to rage, swiftly followed by a humiliation so profound it made his ears ring. What is the meaning of this? His voice was a low growl, laced with barely contained fury, but there was an underlying tremor of uncertainty he couldn't quite mask. Dr. Chen, finding his voice and a new wellspring of courage, stepped forward, shielding Adjoa subtly. Dr. Nakamura, Nurse Mensah, she located the projectile and removed it. Elias Volkov is stable. He spoke with quiet authority, an unshakable conviction born of having witnessed the impossible. Nakamura's eyes darted from Chen to Adjoa, then back to the nail. He reached out, his gloved hand hovering over the tray, as if to confirm its reality. That's impossible. I searched. The imaging was clear. His words were an attempt to reclaim control, to reassert the logic of his world, but they sounded hollow, even to his own ears. Adjoa met his gaze, her expression calm, unyielding, yet devoid of any triumphalism. She merely nodded, her humility a stark contrast to his bluster. The angle was difficult, Doctor. It was nestled. My experience, it allows me to sometimes feel what the eye cannot see, nor the machine fully interpret. It wasn't a challenge, it was an explanation, delivered with the quiet grace that defined her. The experience she spoke of wasn't a formal certification from a prestigious university, it was the raw, visceral knowledge forged in the crucible of necessity. Dr. Chen, sensing the moment, elaborated gently. Nurse Mensah has extensive field experience, Dr. Nakamura. Conflict zones, disaster relief. When high-tech imaging isn't available, or when shrapnel is too fine, she's trained to rely purely on her extraordinary tactile sense. It's an unconventional skill, but tonight, it saved a life. This wasn't a boast, but a quiet revelation of who Adjoa was, not just a nurse, but a seasoned healer, whose hands carried a library of forgotten sensations, a memory of tissue, bone, and foreign objects. It wasn't just a skill but a part of her essence, developed not in sterile labs, but under the most brutal conditions, where every touch was a prayer and every fragment a hidden killer. She had learned to listen with her fingertips, to coax secrets from the body when all other instruments failed. Nakamura stared at Adjoa, the initial wave of anger ebbing, replaced by a complex storm of emotions, grudging respect battling professional jealousy, disbelief grappling with undeniable evidence. He saw not a defiant challenger, but a quiet force, a beacon of a different kind of medical genius. Adjoa wasn't trying to prove him wrong, she was simply trying to save a life, and she had succeeded where he had failed. The chief surgeon, for perhaps the first time in his celebrated career, felt a profound and unsettling shift within himself. His pride had been wounded, yes, but something deeper had been touched. He had witnessed a kind of medicine he had long dismissed, a human intuition that transcended technology. Adjoa Mensah, the quiet new nurse, had, in a single, audacious act, stripped away the layers of his arrogance and laid bare the true meaning of healing. The validation Adjoa received was not in shouted praise or thunderous applause, but in the stunned silence, the humbled gazes, and the undeniable, transformative respect that now shimmered in the air of the operating room. Elias Volkov's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. Days after the surgery, he lay in a private room, a small, neat dressing on his chest the only physical reminder of his near-fatal ordeal. The tiny scar, soon to be almost invisible, would forever be a testament not to the prowess of a chief surgeon, but to the delicate, almost imperceptible touch of a nurse. His family, once shrouded in fear, now visited with tearful gratitude, often stopping Adjoa in the hallways to offer heartfelt thanks that made her cheeks flush with a modest warmth. Elias himself, though still weak, managed a quiet, steady gaze when she visited, a look of profound, life-affirming appreciation that spoke volumes without a single word. He was living proof that heroism didn't always wear a white coat with a prestigious title. Adjoa Mensah never sought the spotlight, and the validation she received was far more profound than any public accolades. Her quiet competence, once overlooked, now resonated through the polished corridors of Regal Ridge. No longer a ghost, she moved with an undeniable, yet still humble, authority. Nurses sought her out for advice, their eyes holding a newfound respect. Junior residents, particularly the one who had given her that silent nod of permission, looked to her not just for assistance but for insight, understanding that her feeling was a form of expertise they had yet to comprehend. Her suggestions in the operating room, once dismissed as impertinent, were now listened to, considered, even actively sought by the attending surgeons on difficult cases. Regal Ridge hadn't changed its grand facade, but its heart, its operational rhythm, had subtly, irrevocably shifted. The transformation in Dr. Kaito Nakamura was perhaps the most complex and telling. He never publicly apologized, nor did he sing Adjoa's praises from the rooftops, that wasn't his style. But his interactions with her were fundamentally altered. The dismissive wave of a hand was gone, replaced by a momentary pause, a direct gaze, an unspoken acknowledgement. He began, almost imperceptibly, to value the unconventional. During ward rounds, he might ask a junior nurse for an observation, something he would never have done before. He started reading articles on tactile diagnostics, quietly exploring the very realm of intuition he had so fiercely scorned. His initial humiliation had curdled into a challenging introspection. He found himself questioning the absolute supremacy of technology, the very foundation of his celebrated career. Adjoa had cracked open his rigid worldview, forcing him to confront the limits of his own brilliance and the profound value of different forms of medical wisdom. His ego was still formidable, but it was now tempered by a grudging, almost reverent respect for a type of healing he hadn't known existed. He still barked orders, but sometimes, just sometimes, there was a fractional hesitation before he did. Dr. Ingrid Hornson's journey was less about humility and more about pragmatic recalibration. The public humiliation of witnessing Adjoa's success where her mentor failed stung deeply. But Ingrid was ambitious and shrewd. She saw the undeniable power of Adjoa's action, the quiet authority it commanded. She still held her prejudices, but she also understood that results mattered. She began to observe Adjoa, not with scorn, but with a new, almost scientific curiosity. She might never overtly praise Adjoa, but she stopped interrupting her, stopped rolling her eyes. A seed of doubt about the absolute infallibility of the medical hierarchy had been planted. Her ambition, once purely focused on climbing the established ladder, now had to contend with the unsettling reality that true mastery could manifest in unexpected, non-traditional forms. She was learning, grudgingly, that excellence wasn't always loud or visible, but could reside in the quietest, most unassuming hands. Adjoa, for her part, remained Adjoa. She didn't seek promotion, didn't demand a new title. She simply continued her work, bringing her unique gifts to every patient. The experience solidified her belief in her own intuition, in the quiet power of human connection and touch in a world increasingly reliant on screens and machines. She had found her place, not by conforming to Regal Ridge's elite mold, but by being authentically herself, by allowing her true abilities to shine through the veneer of hierarchy. She had proven that true expertise transcends titles, that empathy can be a diagnostic tool, and that courage isn't always a roar, but can be a whisper in the face of despair. The story of Elias Volkov, the ricocheting nail, and the nurse who found what the surgeon couldn't, became a whispered legend within Regal Ridge. It wasn't just a medical triumph, it was a testament to human growth, to the breaking down of barriers, and to the enduring hope that even in the most rigid of systems, quiet strength and compassionate brilliance can always find a way to heal, to change, and to inspire. Adjoa Mensah had not merely saved a life, she had transformed a hospital, one quiet, resolute touch at a time. Adjoa's story reminds us that true heroism often whispers, not shouts, proving that quiet strength and unconventional wisdom can rewrite the rules and heal what seems impossible. It's a testament to the power of human connection and valuing every individual's unique gift. Has Adjoa's quiet defiance resonated with you? What other stories of unsung heroes inspire you? If you were moved by this journey, please consider subscribing to our channel. Join our vibrant global community, where together, we champion tales of courage and transformation from around the world. Your invaluable support helps us create more meaningful and impactful narratives like Adjoa's. Thank you for watching, for your engagement, and for being a cherished part of our storytelling family.